This video is a continuation of the last one, and it has examples of the last four problems that you will find on your worksheet. So all of these problems will have an a value or a number that's in front, a coefficient in front of the x squared term that is not 1. So in this case, if you take a look here, in front of the x squared term, we have a 9. And I think I had previously said that we cannot complete the square if we have this a value here. So at the beginning of last video, what I did was I divided all my terms, I divided both sides of my equation by this 9 to get rid of it, because that's one of my properties of equality, right? I have that division property of equality that tells me I'm allowed to do that. So my 9s go away. 9 goes into 18 2 times. And then I have this positive 8/9 here, and 0 divided by any number is just 0. So now it looks like the problems I did, the last four problems I did as examples in the last video. So what I'm going to do is keep my x terms on one side and add a blank. And I need to move 8/9 to the other side, so I'm going to subtract it from both sides of my equation to get a negative 8/9. And remember, I put a blank on both sides. So now I find the number that's in front, the coefficient of x, and I multiply that coefficient times 1/2. I'm jumping ahead, I forgot my multiplication symbol, and then I square that. I know half of 2 is 1, and when I square 1, I just get 1. So I am adding 1 to both sides of this equation. But I need to remember, I need to find a common denominator here because I have a fraction. So my denominator is going to be 9, so I'm going to multiply that 1 by 9 over 9. So when I factor the left-hand side, if you can remember, it becomes a perfect square, and I should see this right here in my factor, and that makes it all easy when I multiply. All right, so when I add negative 9 to 1 times 9, 1 times 9 is 9, so negative 9 plus 9 is going to be 1/9. Now I'm ready to use my square root property. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and I can't forget my plus or minus. And I'm going to split up my fraction here because it makes it easier. And I know my denominator, my numerator, the square root of 1 is just going to be 1, but my denominator factors, and I have a nice group of 2 here. So when I take the square root, I get x plus 1 equals plus or minus. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 9 is going to be 3, so equals plus or minus 3. So now I'm going to set up my two equations over here. I get x plus 1 equals positive 1/3. And x plus 1 equals negative 1/3. So now I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides of my equation. Whoops. When I subtract 1 from both sides of my equation, remember I have to find a common denominator. So that's going to be a number over 3, right? Okay, so that's going to be negative 3 over 3. And again, I wrote a half for whatever reason. Minus 1/3. So negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2/3. And then negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4/3. So I get my two answers just like that. All right. So this next one is a lot like number 6. So again, my a value is not 1, so I need to get rid of it. So I'm going to use my division property of equality and divide all terms by 9. So my 9 reduces out. 9 goes into 36 4 times. And I'm left with this 11/9, which doesn't reduce. And then I'm going to move my 11/9 over. I have my x terms together. And I'm going to subtract it to the other side, and I'm not going to forget my blank. I'm going to find the coefficient of x, or the number in front of x. I'm going to multiply it by 1/2 and then square it. So half of 4 is 2, and when I square it, I get 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides, but I also know that I need a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply 4 over 1 by 9 over 9, so I get a nice common denominator. Now when I factor the left side, I know it's going to be a perfect square, and I know I'm going to see this positive 2 in my factor. So I know 4 times 9 is 36. 36 minus 11 is 25 ninths. And now I have to take the square root of both sides. And remember to split your fraction up. And I know the square root of 25. 25 can be factored into 5 times 5 and 9 into 3 times 3. So I have nice groups of 2 here that come out. So I get x plus 2 equals, that's going to be plus or minus 5 over 3. So now I'm going to make my two equations. X plus 2 equals positive 5/3, and x plus 2 equals negative 5/3. To solve, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. And my 2's will cancel out, and I get negative 2 plus 5/3. And I get negative 2 minus 5/3. And if I rewrite 2 as a fraction over 3, right, I'm going to multiply it by 3 over 3, so I get negative 6 over 3 plus 5/3. Negative 6 over 3 minus 5/3. And so when I go ahead and add that, I get negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1/3. Negative 6 minus 5 is negative 11/3. So those are my two answers. So now this next problem, again, I have an a value that is not 1, so I need to eliminate it. So I'm going to divide all of my terms by 8 using my division property of equality. My 8's reduce out. But now I have a number that's in front of x that's a fraction. So I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to move my constant over, keep my x terms on the same side, but move my constant over by subtracting it. And I'm going to find the number in front of x, the coefficient of x, negative 5/8. I'm going to multiply it by a half and then square it. So I get negative 5/16, and I have to square it. So I get 25, and I know 16 squared is 256. So I'm going to add 25 over 256 to both sides of my equation. So I know I need a common denominator. How many times does 8 go into 256? Well, it goes in 32 times. So I'm going to have to multiply negative 8 1/8 by 32 over 32. So I know this looks like it's going to be really hard to factor the left-hand side, but again, remember, I said it's going to be a perfect square, and I should be seeing this negative 5/16. If I did everything right, I should see this negative 5/16 in my factor. So now I have a negative 32 plus 25 is a negative 7 over 256. So this shouldn't be too hard. I'm just going to take the square root of both sides. And I'm going to not forget my plus or minus, and I'm going to split up my numerator and my denominator. And I know that when I take the square root of a negative number, I am going to get an imaginary number. And I know I just got 256 by squaring 16. So I know that factors into 16 times 16. So that's really nice. So now when I move up to the other side, I have x minus 5/16 equals, that square root of negative 1 is an I. 7 does not come out. It stays under. It does not have a pair. And I'm pulling one of the 16's out on the denominator. So this is where I'm going to split it up into two equations. a positive I radical 7 over 16. And then for the other equation, it's going to equal the negative I radical 7 over 16. So I have to add 5/16 to both sides. I'm going to do it for both equations. And then I get a positive 5/16 plus I radical 7 over 16. And then for the other side, I get a positive 5/16 minus I radical 7 over 16. And those are the two answers for this equation. All right, the next, I'm not going to finish this next one, but I just want you to notice that my terms are out of order. I have x's on both sides, so I need to maneuver this equation around. So I'm going to move this over. There are no like terms to add to it. So I get 8x squared minus 3x plus 1. And on the right-hand side, I get 0. All right, so in order to set this up correctly, I would subtract the 1 from both sides. And this is where I would leave my blank. And what did I forget to do? Oh, geez Louise. Okay, students, here we go. Mrs. Peterson forgot that her A value is not 1. She needs to divide all terms by 8. So I get x squared minus 3/8 x plus 1/8 equals 0. This is where I now subtract my 1/8 and move it to the other side. And I leave my blanks at this step. And then I circle and find the number in front of x, the coefficient of x, negative 3/8. I have to multiply that by 1/2 and square it. And so I get negative 3/16. I have to square that to get 9/256. And that is what I'm going to add to both sides. But I'm not going to finish this one because it's very much like the last one. And we already said that 8 goes into 256 32 times. So you guys can finish this on your own if you're ambitious enough. And that's it for this lesson. All of your homework problems are very similar to the examples I've done.